We are in the thick of football season, and Penn State football has been on a tear in recruiting, but that doesn't mean that they get to have all the love, because Penn State basketball now, under new head coach Micah Shrewsberry, is on a bit of a run their own with the class of 2023. To get more information on that, we are talking with our Hoops recruiting insider, Dave Eckert, today on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. That's Dave. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, T. Frank. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this, to learn a little bit more about Penn State basketball under the new head coach, Micah Shrewsberry, and he seems to be making an immediate impact so far on the program. Tell us a little bit about what this commitment means for the program and how this is going, I guess, for Penn State basketball.
Yes, sir. So Saturday, you may have missed it while you were in the tailgate fields. Penn State Hoops got a commitment from top 150 big man Kebba Njie out of La Lumiere School in Indiana. Huge commitment for them. Really talented big guy. And that's kind of what this class was missing for them. It hadn't had a big guy. He's 6'9", so he can fill that role, really well. And yeah, it's a really key cog to what has already been a very good class for Micah Shrewsberry. He's really made an impact on the recruiting trail already.
And you had a chance to talk to him, and if you want to check out that article where there's a Q&A with Kemba and David, BWI, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can check out Blue White Illustrated on our website. So tell us a little bit about what he said were the deciding factors and why he chose Penn State.
So yeah, his big thing, which I found interesting, none of the other prospects had really talked about this too much, was Penn State staff presented him with an individualized workout plan, more or less. Here's how we're getting you better, and here's how we're going to do it. And to him, it sounded like that was a really big difference maker. He wants to be instructed one-on-one. He realizes that this is a team game, and obviously that's important. But he wants assurances that his game is going to be developed, and Penn State staff gave him that, and that was a big thing for him.
And that has been a part of the profile for Micah Shrewsberry and his staff, right? That they've been able to do that. They have a consistent track record of getting guys better and to the league, right? I'm not mistaken in that.
Absolutely. The other thing that, a lot of the prospects really like is they'll break down their film for them. And say, here's how, look, here's what you need to work on. Here's what we think is good. So that's another thing. And yeah, I mean, he's a former NBA coach, right? Yeah. So he's an NBA assistant coach with the Boston Celtics. So if you're trying to get to the league, I mean, there aren't many better choices in college basketball. He's a guy who can get you there. He knows what it takes. So I think that's really made an impact early here.
And Njie is just one part of an already quickly developing class for 2023, right? Tell us about the rest of the class, and I guess who stands out that they've been able to bring into the program outside of this talented big man.
Yeah, that's 2022, T. Frank. Sorry, but
excuse me.
Yeah,
excuse me.
It's they've brought in Jameel Brown, very, very good guard out of the Philadelphia area. He played his AAU ball for Team Final, which is the same AAU program that produced Tony Carr and Lamar Stevens. So that's a relationship that obviously it would benefit Penn State to continue fostering. So that's important. He's a really good player. They've got Kanye Clary. He was their first commitment out of Virginia. He had a really nice showing at Peach Jam. I think he's kind of under the radar a little bit. And then they went to Ohio, and they brought in Evan Mahaffey out of Muller in Cincinnati. Lanky guard, can defend really well. He led his conference in blocks last season, which, if you're not playing in the post, that's obviously an achievement. So yeah, it's looking like a really good class. It's ranked in the top 20, which if you're a Penn State fan, you're saying, like, is that allowed?
Right.
I believe I got this stat on Monday that Penn State was actually one of 6 schools across the country to have a top 20 class in football and a top 20 class in basketball right now. So it just kind of tells you a little bit, it's working for them. It's going well, which if you're a Penn State basketball fan, again, it's like, okay, what's the catch? What's going on here?
So that's my next question, Dave. And we're going to raise this for inflation. So here's the $100 million question. Should you be optimistic if you're a Penn State football fan or a basketball fan, excuse me? Should you take this optimism and run with it and say that this is a turning point for the program?
I think yes, to be honest. And I know. Look, I've been following this program for a very long time. I can't ever remember a staff recruiting this well. And they've had classes that compare. That Lamar Stevens and Tony Carr class in 2016 was comparable. But look, if you look at some of the guys that they're in the conversation with, and we'll talk about one of them, I think, in Derek Lively, who went to Duke.
Yeah.
I can't ever remember Penn State being in those conversations. They hosted another 5-star prospect during Ball State weekend, Justin Edwards out of Philadelphia. So yeah, they're in the picture for some big names. There's another big name committing on Friday who we think Penn State has a shot at. That's Otega Oweh.
Yeah, let's talk about him a little bit now. Sure. About, obviously, Odafe Oweh is his brother. You may know him as Jason Oweh. Obviously, the ties to Penn State are there. Has he talked at all about how much that matters to him and how much that plays a factor in his recruitment? Because obviously it's a different sport and he's his own individual. So how much has that played into this recruitment process?
He's very private. So that's the thing about him is he hasn't really said very much at all. But the way that it's been explained to me is do not assume that he's coming to Penn State just because his brother did.
Right.
That said, my interpretation is that Penn State has, a relatively good shot of landing him on Friday. I'm not, I haven't made a pick or anything. I think there are people who are doing that. And I think that might be a little bit off, maybe a little bit premature, but I do think that there's a decent chance. And look, the middle Oweh brother just signed with Penn State basketball as a walk-on. So
that helps.
Clear, yeah, that matters. So clearly they're going all out here. It would be their second best commitment ever behind Tony Carr. I think he's ranked 76th in the Rivals 100 if I have my numbers right. And yeah, he's a great player. He's explosive. He can score. Penn State fans, if you have any interest in Penn State basketball, that is a huge thing to watch on Friday.
Yeah, and one that was earlier this week that I think a lot of Penn State fans were excited about and knew the reality of the situation. But again, you mentioned the fact that they are in on a lot of really good basketball players. Derek Lively, local kid, he ends up choosing Duke. But how much has that process been, for the staff and in that situation? How'd that play out, and how do you think when you're in the conversation for the number 2 overall player in a class, what does that do for you in recruiting?
It matters. It definitely matters. You saw Jameel Brown on Twitter campaigning for him to come, and it was interesting because I have never experienced a recruitment like that. Yeah. In my time following Penn State basketball and in my briefer time here covering recruiting, I've never seen Penn State basketball in for a guy of that talent. So it was interesting to follow. They got him on campus in the summer. He came for an unofficial visit. Mm-hmm. He did not take an official visit, but he was interested, and obviously they were interested. It was a big deal. Granted, I don't think he was ever really going to come to Penn State. I don't think Penn State ever really led. But it's important for a program like Penn State to be involved in these discussions. It's important for Penn State to be a factor. And look, I'm not saying that they're going to land these type of kids, but look, if they get one, just one, at any point, it's a huge deal. It's a program changer. Yeah. So it's the type of conversations you want to see Penn State start to enter if you're a basketball fan. and if you're a Penn State fan. So it was an exciting process, but like you said, I think the reality was always kind of clear that, hey, there were some other options here that might have been a little bit more appealing from a basketball perspective.
Yeah, and so his mom, both a former Penn State athlete and worked at Penn State Athletics. I'm not sure if she still works there. I haven't spoken with her in a couple years, but nice lady. And that always helps when you want to get the number 2 overall player in a certain prospect class to get on campus that his mom knows the university pretty well. From a perspective of not just a guy who grew up here and is a part of the conversation, but you've mentioned a couple 5-star guys, some guys from Indiana as well, choosing Penn State over some of those more classic basketball schools. What's the impact of Micah Shrewsberry on a national perspective in recruiting? Not just, and I know the previous staff did a very good job of developing a recruiting base on the eastern part of the state down into the DMV, made some really tough inroads, but it seems like with some of the contacts that Shrewsberry has from his former position elsewhere, this has a chance for Penn State, if they're successful, to open up new areas in recruiting for Penn State basketball. Would you say that's a fair assessment, or is this really just a leftover of what Shrewsberry had from his previous job?
I think it's a perfectly fair assessment. He said so. In his opening press conference, he was asked about recruiting Philadelphia, and he was like, look, we want to recruit Philadelphia, but we're not going to only recruit Philadelphia. We want to recruit elsewhere too. We want to be an option for kids who aren't from Pennsylvania, who are from other parts of the country. So clearly, that's happened. They've got a kid from Virginia, a kid from Indiana, a kid from Ohio in this class. So, they're in for Oweh, who's from New Jersey. Jameel Brown is so far the only Philadelphia guy here. So, I do think that that's the case. Whether it gets to the point that, hey, they're an option for this top 50 kid from Southern California, I don't know if that's realistic, but you've got to like what you're seeing for sure.
If you want to check out Dave's article, again, it is bluewhiteillustrated.com for the latest Penn State football and recruiting news and basketball recruiting news like you get from Dave here. Join us inside the Lions Den Premium Forum for more insider information as well. Dave's been doing a great job there, giving all the nuggets, and people, if you follow along and you're in the Lions Den, you usually know information before it's public. So if you want to be in the know about Penn State basketball as they're building what seems to be a good future for the basketball team, make sure you check that out, the Lions Den, and become a member, Blue White Illustrated, for our premium content. And of course, the October issue is out in newsstands featuring Penn State's Freak List and other exclusive content. Learn more at bluewhiteonline.com or by calling customer service 800-421-7751. I usually have a magazine here with me, but I've been so busy I haven't had a chance to pick one up yet. So we'll get one by the end of the week. And of course, if you're here on YouTube, if you're listening here on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated Video. We put up stuff every single day. The BWI Daily Edition that you're listening to right now, one a day from now to the end of time, Monday through Friday. So Dave's been joining me here and there on the Daily Edition, but yesterday in the Penn State football press conference for the Villanova game, I loved how you responded to what James Franklin said about the officiating here and there, because he dropped some not-so-subtle hints before he went on a 2-minute tirade, I should say. He was very calm by doing what he did, but I loved how you responded to a lot of the things that were said on Twitter. Just take us through what James Franklin talked about yesterday when it came to the officiating in the Penn State-Auburn game this past weekend.
So he began subtly. He dropped some hints about him and his players being fired up by some unnamed adversity, which clearly was the refs, right? Yeah. And then, he responded to another question saying that he felt like Penn State was playing more than Auburn. Once again, the refs. And then at the end, once all the questions were finished and we thought it was over, he said, "No, I've got some things to say," and he got it off his chest. He spoke about his interpretations of some of the calls that went against Penn State in that game, and frankly, I think he was right to do so. You know, there was some ridiculous stuff that happened. You guys know, if you're watching, it was bad. So it was interesting. It was a little bit unexpected, but hey, I don't blame him.
Have you seen James do that before? Have you seen James Franklin address something as controversial as that in a press conference?
He'll frequently say he has something to say. Usually he does it at the beginning in his opening statement. But I don't ever really remember the officiating being one of those things. I think that was pretty unique.
So to me, that's the reason I wanted to talk about it today, is that he doesn't. And he does as much as he can, voices his displeasure without saying anything about bad officiating, because there's obviously repercussions that can come from doing such things. But that's the first time I remember him actually going through individual calls and adjudicating them afterwards and saying, like, this was our interpretation. I want to coach my staff the right way. This is how we delve into the rule book and what we saw. I mean, I don't want to say it's passive-aggressive because he has to word it carefully, but it was very much a middle finger to the SEC referees, which I guess I was not expecting that. And it was really interesting to watch at the end of the press conference, which he did, by the way, at the end of the press conference, so that we couldn't ask any follow-up questions about it.
Yeah, it was passive-aggressive, but I think it had to be for him to avoid some of the repercussions that you're talking about. So yeah, I think his biggest sticking point was we kind of covered the loss of down on Saturday that just appeared from nowhere and nobody has any explanation for. But his biggest sticking point was the intentional grounding play. Yeah. Before that, where Sean Clifford and Parker Washington clearly just miscommunicated on which route Parker Washington should be running. He said it was an option play, so Clifford thought Washington was going deep and he didn't. And he was like, Sean Clifford wasn't under pressure. How can you call intentional grounding when there's no pressure involved?
That's what we talked about on Monday on the BWI Live show, was the fundamental aspect of intentional grounding is you are intentionally avoiding something being pressure. There was no pressure, so you fundamentally can't have intentional grounding. Otherwise, you're just burning a down for no point. And that's what happened. They got a down burned for them for no point, which I thought was I was glad that is how he phrased that, because that's exactly what we talked about from the very beginning of that call. That's just wrong. Like, from the very basis of kind of in targeting, you have to have certain aspects for it to be targeting. In intentional grounding, there's one really important issue that you need to cover first, and they just kind of ignored it, and that mystified me. But here we are on a Wednesday talking about Penn State football and the officiating from last Saturday. So, it is a really interesting story, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because James Franklin mentioned it. But I guess the rehashing isn't going to stop, is it? It is one of those things that's going to go down as something Penn State fans remember for a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to stop, because it's an FCS week and we need some content. But
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it's we're going to talk about it, man. But yeah, look, I don't hate it. It's one of the biggest takeaways from the game, which is a shame because it was an awesome game and there were definitely some other aspects of it that, maybe from a more moral perspective, you'd like to be talking about more, but it's fine. He had a right to complain. He complained. I think, and again, he complained using facts. It wasn't like, this referee is a clown, whatever. He was like, well, actually, on punts, you can't cover the snapper, and they covered the snapper, so it should have been a penalty. So it was methodical. It was well thought out. It was calm. I think he did it the right way.
Yeah, and so to circle back to hoops recruiting and kind of tie these two things together, one last thing I want to talk about is I think Penn State fans of the program have felt like it has been neglected over time when it comes to investing into developing a good basketball program. And truthfully, the university and the athletic department as a whole will benefit from having a good basketball program. Do you think that Penn State basketball can get to the point where they are generating the revenue and the eyeballs and the interest the same way that football is, or is it what everyone has always said, that you can't make basketball work in Center County? Do you believe that, and do you think that Micah Shrewsberry can change that narrative?
I don't think it will ever approach football, even at basketball schools. Financially, it tends not to. But
to be a factor, I guess is my point. To be a factor in the revenue generation to support all of the sports that Penn State has, because football, as we talked about with Nate Bauer in a previous show, football carries the brunt of that job. Can basketball help with that in the future if Micah Shrewsberry is the coach it seems like he is so far?
I think that it can. I think there's probably a cap to it because, look, the location of Penn State makes it very difficult for Jim from Philadelphia to come watch Penn State play Wisconsin on a Wednesday night. Yeah. It's tough. It's a difficult ask. And so, I think there's 1 or 2 weekend Big Ten games on their schedule this year, which, again, if you're Penn State, you're annoyed with that because it has to be on a weekend for you to draw from some of these places, from the urban centers where there are Penn State fans and Penn State alumni. Yeah. So as far as like a ticket revenue gate issue, I think it's going to be tough. But certainly, if Penn State is really good and there's a huge game, Penn State is ranked number 10 and they're playing number 5 Michigan, and the winner is kind of in the driver's seat for the Big Ten title, people are going to show up for that game. Yeah. So yeah, I think they can get to that point where maybe they have an off year where they're capable of competing at the top end of the Big Ten, and in other years they're consistently competing to get into the NCAA tournament. Are they ever going to be Michigan State, or even Ohio State? Probably not. I think that's an unreasonable expectation. But if you're a Penn State fan, you're just happy if they're competing to get into March Madness. Yeah. And certainly I think the staff, the way that they've recruited so far, and the way that prospects tend to think about their ideas, I certainly think the staff can get to the point where they're regularly doing that instead of, we've got this one really good class of freshmen and we have to wait till they're juniors and seniors for us to compete for anything. Right. I don't think that's going to be the future or the reality for this Penn State program under Micah Shrewsberry. I think Penn State fans have a right to be excited, whether or not that success turns into, a financial benefit for the university that's more substantial than what they already get from the TV rights. I don't really think so, but certainly it can be more than what it is. And if they're good, that helps. So
we are literally a week away from October, which means basketball is starting up soon. So we are recovering Penn State basketball in the middle of football season here on the BWI Daily Edition. Our recruiting insider, that is Dave Eckert, joining us today. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving us your information and your insight.
Thanks, Steve Frank. Always a fun time.
We will be back again tomorrow. Penn State is practicing tonight, so we'll have our thoughts and reactions to what we see at Penn State practice. Dave will be there. I'll be there. Ryan Snyder will be there. Nate Bauer will be there. So follow along Blue White Illustrated wherever you get your podcasts for the BWI Daily Edition, the recruiting podcast, and more. And, of course, search youtube.com/Blue White Illustrated for the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Talk to you tomorrow.